I'm Art Perry, also known as Professor Art, and welcome. Uh, at this very moment, you could be anywhere doing anything, but you chose to be here. I appreciate it. You could be out in the woods, in the dappled light, walking with your dog, walking with your mom, walking with your lover, walking with yourself. You could just be. But I really appreciate you being here, and I certainly will make sure that your time will be rewarding and well spent. So I hope all of you rebel rousers are doing well. Rebel rousers may ring a bell. You go, rebel rouser. Rebel rouser was a recording, a record, an astounding instrumental record by the uh, irreplaceable, unpassable Dwayne Eddy from 1958. Now, I'm just mentioning that because the title of the instrumental recording, which was really tough and had a real edginess to it, right? That this sort of twang of the guitar, um, something which was used by other people and used by, of course, uh, Ennio Morricone in his great soundtracks for those spaghetti westerns. But Dwayne Eddy was the guy who pretty well initiated it, and he wrote this piece of music, this edgy piece of music, all 2 minutes and something of it. Anyway, he was going to call it Rabble Rouser, which, is someone who kicks up dust and, creates a kerfuffle. Another great word in the English language, kerfuffle. Anyway, and he was working with a man called Lee Hazelwood. Now, Lee Hazelwood, some of you may know as the person who collaborated with Nancy Sinatra, and he wrote that um, you know, mythic song now, These Boots Are Made for Walking. Anyway, Lee Hazelwood said to Dwayne, Rabble Rouser's good, but how about Rebel Rouser? And so it was named Rebel Rouser. We'll be looking today at the way in which the term rebel has had a perception, right? How it's perceived by people when it's used. When someone's called a rebel or rebels used in conjunction with anything, right? What does that actually mean? And that's important for rebel culture because uh, people have been so defined by being rebels. So, what does that mean? We'll get there today. Uh, Rebel Rouser, you should check it out, Dwayne Eddy. It came out the same year that another uh, guitar, twangy, dark piece of music came in the same year. Just one of those serendipitous things, and that was the Rumble, which was an instrumental by Link Ray. Don't they have great names, Dwayne Eddy and Link Ray. Of course, they're going to be doing, dark instrumental music. Anyway, this piece of music called Rumble, which sort of fits into the rebel. The reason I'm starting off with this is because music, soundtrack to your life. These pieces of music, and you're going to have the ones in your life, the guitar riffs, the singers, the melodies that will be with you forever. They will haunt you. A time and a place when a piece of music is played. People have our song, music that becomes identifiable, and it wells up uh, from more than what it is. And we're going to talk in a second about the idea of gestalt. Well, I won't get us there quite yet, but this idea that something is greater than its parts, and music is like that. It's abstract. There's no form other than sound in the air, and these instrumentals, even without words, from 1958, both Rebel Rouser and Link Ray's Rumble, uh, have really stood the test of time. I believe, well, I don't believe, I know that the film Forrest Gump, when he was running at full speed, Rebel Rouser was the music that was chosen to accompany him on that. Uh, Rumble, if you've heard Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin go on about how that piece of music changed him. So, and they are, I mean, Rumble was banned. It was banned because the title Rumble at that time, 1958, was about gangs fighting, coming together and having a rumble, like in West Side Story. And so there is a kind of um, toughness, a sense of you know confrontation, going against the status quo that comes with the word rebel, the kind of music that came out of rock and roll in the 50s. So we'll talk a bit more about that later, but I wanted to start off with those, referencing those two, uh, because last week in the first episode of Rebel Culture, we looked at a number of things, looked at a few literary works by people who, were trying to find their own voice outside of the mainstream, outside of, ordinary entertainment culture. And we looked at James Joyce's Ulysses briefly, and we looked at Mikhail Bulgakov's amazing book about the devil and the sort of Faustian thing, the Master and Margarita. Now, today, I want to take us further down the rabbit, the rabbit rebel hole, um, and look at this idea of perception of what a rebel is. And I want to start off with a quote by someone who I would say was one of the greatest historical rebels of all time. The 18th into the 19th century mystic uh, William Blake. Now, William Blake is someone who, I could do a whole podcast on, a whole episode on William Blake. Uh, he's moved me so greatly when I was looking for you look for um, people that have fought the demons of reason and understanding and trying to figure out what it's all about. And he's someone who was able to move into uh, thought perception that was so deep And he was on his own. He was surviving William Blake by doing engravings and so forth of other people's work. But on the side, and this is so common for, you know, people within rebel culture, they have to survive, right? And their rebel views, their rebelosity, is too confrontational, right? It's not understood. It's seen uh, as often even as junk, disposable, because it doesn't fit into what people expect. And so often, like Blake, uh, these rebels are rebellious, but they have to survive. So they do other things with their abilities as writers. Many of the great people, authors and so forth, would work on screenplays, would do this kind of thing for Hollywood because of the money, and then they could do what they wanted. So William Blake was like that. Now, William Blake um, had a lot to say about perception, about we have our inner selves, the one that we know to a point. Then we have the subconscious that keeps coming up and proves us wrong. But we have that inner self that sees the outer world, how we perceive the outer world. And with that, I want to look at how the concept of the rebel, how these people who create rebel call, how they're seen. Now, Blake um, said something which I've often replayed in my mind, and it's a quote. And I'm going to have a few quotes today because people can say it just so amazingly. And the quote from Blake is, "A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees." So what he's saying there is that you bring to any experience or any realization within yourself, you bring all of who you are and your own experience. Now, this I find this interesting with Blake because he's someone who didn't move much beyond London and certainly didn't leave Britain. Yet he had this huge universal view um, of existence, and we'll talk, I think, a little bit too about uh, poetry and how poetry, uh, as I mentioned last time, was they're thin little volumes, right? I have one here. Uh, this is the poems of Ezra Pound, and I'll have a quote from him shortly. But I mean, look at this. This is, the thickness of a slice of bread, right? Yet in here are the most uh, thoughtful reductions of clarity. So clarity about so much. And if you describe things commonly, to the point that people go, oh, yes, that is a red car with such and such, you see, you hear, you get the image, right? But poets, they take all of life's experience, all the trappings of being alive, and reduce them to a cup full of words. A few words, right? And those words open up for us so much. So, in dealing with perception, perception comes from your own experience, but also from the triggers and the things you have in your own life that help you see and, if not understand, at least deal with the things in your life. And poetry is something which brings it all together. Now, imagery. Now we're getting into the image of the rebel, not just the concept. An image is something that carries. Well, I'll put on a quote by Ezra Pound. It's a great quote, right? He said about imagery that the image is more than an idea. It is a vortex or cluster of fused ideas and is endowed with energy. Okay. Just think about that for a second, right? The idea that an image is more than just an idea, a simple idea, but it's a vortex or cluster of fused ideas, many ideas. That's what poetry does too. It takes so much, and then it gives you a vortex, right, where everything comes together. And rebels think this way. Many rebels think this way, right? They think poetically. They think of not in simplistic, descriptive terms, but in terms of very, very deep, considered, philosophical, spiritual, existential understanding. And if we look at the idea of an image, a simple image, it's pleasant, right? I talked briefly last time about strawberry art. Art that's entertainment. It's great. We all need that. We all need a little bit of fun and frivolity. Oh, don't we? But other times you want to question. You want, as I say, if you don't get answers, at least you want to raise those heavy, often unanswerable questions. And so if we look at someone like Ezra Pound, the poet, as someone who is, giving us a deeper look, a deeper dive, he's someone who spent his, 12 years of his life institutionalized. They've diagnosed him from, whom he was as being someone with serious bipolar problems with his understanding. But when he was institutionalized, he would write down the ideas for this poem. It's called the Cantos, and it was one he worked on. Like, you think of poetry being a small, sort of series of words that contain so much. Well, he wrote the Cantos was a poem he wrote, and I believe it was something like 800 pages. That's a long poem over many years. So when you're a rebel, you don't even go by the rules of being a rebel. You find your own way, and often what has been labeled insanity or cognitive confusion leads to visions, and not just sort of unhinged, mad visions of whatever, but rather visions of that come out in the art, like Van Gogh's skies, right? They're visionary. They're seeing beyond what's there. Yet we understand when we see the Van Gogh, it's not just abstraction. It actually is a connection. There is a term which is used, and the term is visual gestalt. Visual gestalt. It's a theory of perception. We're talking about perception here. And it emphasizes the processing of the complexities that we see, and all the patterns, all the information that's in there, and brings it to a kind of a resolve. So think about this: if you look at a tree, there, like Blake says, look at a tree. The amount of leaves that are on that tree, you can't perceive them all at once. You can't perceive all the leaves and all the veins, and then all the there's a point where you get an imprint for you of what that is, treeness. This idea of creating an image that has a gestalt or an imprint or a resolution of all the information so it's remembered. How many images do we have in our brains daily? Gazillions. And we remember just some of it. But poets and visual artists, creative people, are able to find ways to make images or ideas stick, right? We carry them around with us forever. And there is a spontaneity of perception when you see something. And that's the visual gestalt, when you're not trying to analyze it, you're not trying to take it apart. Bam, you get it. And a lot of these within rebel culture, they're dealing with things that are difficult, right? That are challenging, but they don't distance us. They engage us. And they do it by this idea of gestalt, of taking all the complexities and making it understandable on a spontaneous way. Now, I want to bring in a bit of visual art here. That was part of what I taught over all those decades was art history and visual art, along with writing and so forth. But I want to bring in Andy Warhol. Right? Andy Warhol and his first sort of celebrity portrait. We all know him now as the person who did all these images. But in 1962, he did his first important celebrity portrait of Marilyn Monroe. And it's called the Gold Marilyn, or the Golden Marilyn Monroe, from 1962. And this work, if you see it, I believe it's in New York, you don't forget it. A lot of Warhol's work have that you and what do you get from it, right? Is it simply, you know, something that's pleasant, or is it something which is realigning? And it's realigning, right? He, for instance, with this image of Marilyn Monroe, 1962. It was done shortly after her death. So it really is like a memento mori, right? It's like uh, almost becomes like a reliquary, right? Almost religious, like an icon. And for Warhol, his own experience, coming from his full name is Warholia, from a Slovakian parents, and they moved to Pittsburgh, and they would go to a Byzantine um, Catholic church in Pittsburgh that had a massive screen in front of the altar of gold icons of saints, of the Virgin Mary, and so forth. And this is what Warhol had in his mind when he wanted to do something after, certainly someone who was so well recognized and loved in America and came to a tragic death at a young age, like most, martyrs and people who you see in these icons or reliquaries. And he used the gold, and not a little, a whole, um, um, like if you think of Byzantine uh, mosaics, right? I don't know, but in Venice, right? San Marco, these mosaics, right, which are pieces of glass with a bit of gold backing, gold leaf. Well, they shimmer, they shine, they create uh, an ethereal kind of space for these saints or religious figures. Well, that's exactly what Warhol was doing, was creating this iconic image. Now, the complexity of this, right? This cluster of fused ideas that has an energy. He does that, and was he a rebel, Warhol? Yeah, you bet. I mean, uh, he's one of these people who, when you say that, he was so so famous. He made so much money. He was, how can you call him a rebel? Well, a rebel is a state of mind, too. And uh, he was continually uh, refreshing the ideas of what you could do with creativity. Many people said, oh, he was a sellout. He would do portraits of German businessmen and use diamond dust and so forth. Well, yeah, he did that, but he also would do, uh, you know, paintings of car crashes, paintings that were pushing. Remember, one of the first shows I saw of his, uh, other than the portraits, was one called torsos, and it was nude body torsos, very, very charged, and a lot of people found it too frank, too voyeuristic. Uh, but that's what Warhol did, and in his films, if you've seen any of Warhol's films, some of them are, you know, very, very unnerving. And so what I'm trying to put in perspective here is that somebody like Warhol, somebody like Ezra Pound, who was institutionalized and was hanging bits of paper from his ceiling and writing these poems, or someone like William Blake, who, centuries ago was creating imagery and poetry that he felt needed to be done, and there was no one who was going to listen to him, right? He wasn't creating a product, right? He did that to make his money. He did, I think the artist's name is John Flaxman, who was a neoclassic artist, did very beautiful sort of line drawings in a neoclassical way. And I believe he did a lot of prints of his work. But then when Blake got to do his own prints, he did what were called monoprints. He put everything in there, right? It wasn't just a perfect little line drawing. He worked in different media and uh, uh, like Turner, the painter, British painter, who was trying to do these atmospheric paintings where he was trying to work with oil painting, and he found that if you put coffee in there, like water, fluid coffee in there, it created a resist, and you got like another sort of feel to it. It wasn't about I'm doing something, for the ages and so forth. How can I get what I need, right? And both Blake and Turner's works are curatorial nightmares because they're so fragile because of the way they were experimenting to get across what they wanted. Blake's work at the Tate in London, they're in dark rooms. It's one of the great things to do if you just want to spend some very introspective, contemplative time looking at art. These dark rooms where these prints by Blake are, and these prints are phantasmagorical. They are, you know, images of dragons, of demons, of visions from uh, stories in the Bible that you know he envisioned, like Jacob's ladder. He just did. I mean, amazing. And Ezra Pound, in his poetry, also creates a real sense of vision. I was reading some of Ezra Pound's poems before um, I started to record here, and there was one. I don't think I can find it because I didn't note it, but it was so incredible. It was just a few little words. I'll just grab one. I'm going to read a bit of poetry now, so please don't click off. Right? This is um, it's a simple thing, right? It's called "In a Station of the Metro." Okay, subway station. What's he say? He says, "The apparition of all these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough." Okay, wow. The audience for um, these difficult creative rebels, right? Uh, it's it's so different than mainstream culture, and I think that's why they're called rebels, because they're rebelling against the status quo, against what's accepted, right? Um, it's hard to dispute, other than maybe an artistic merit, most of mainstream culture because it's good. You don't have to like it, but you can. I mean, if you listen to popular music and so forth. A lot of it's just very good, ditties, but it's not it's not pushing us as an audience. You readjust your position with the universe. Right? Um, it's I don't know how to describe it. Well, maybe you understand. I'm sure where the idea of an epiphany, where things happen, where all of a sudden it's clear, right? For that moment, right? It's like a still point, an epicenter where, and works of art take us there. And often the people who are doing that uh, are not, as I say, entertainers or people who are creating something to pay the bills or whatever. They're actually on a quest, right? A mission to understand for themselves and to share what they've culled. Anyway, I was going to mention too before we leave William Blake. We won't. We'll come back to him, but I wanted to mention that there's a photograph of Patti Smith, one of my favorite contemporary poets, who you know is influenced by other poets, and she is very influenced by William Blake. And there's a photograph of her reading this book. This is the biography, but it's more than that, by Peter Ackroyd on Blake. And she's reading this, and she's actually quoted this. This, see, the other thing is, please, write in your books. If you want to have display copies that you can have on your shelves, do that. That's great. But have copies like this where you can, just put in all your thoughts, underline the things that mean something to you. I mean, I don't know what I've got here, but just this says Blake creates his own mythological system, which he did. He created his own characters, right? Character called Your Reason, Urizon, Your Reason, meaning your reason. And he was seen as a demonic character, right? The one that only thinks in terms of reason and not imagination. Anyway, I would recommend this book if you're interested at all in William Blake. Even if you don't know anything about William Blake, this is a really good place to start. And yeah, he is, as I say, challenging, difficult. But once you get into his zone, it is you won't want to leave, right? Because it's so beautiful and thrilling. I mentioned the idea in the first episode of the sublime, where something is so beautiful it's frightening, and that's what you get with Blake. So I just thought I'd mention that. Okay, so this idea when I show Andy Warhol, who I think also is someone who, doesn't go down the straight path, even though he had success. But he's one of these people who changed culture and society without changing himself. He allowed to create things that were so meaningful and indispensable. There are lots of people who I talk to, art historians and others, who think he's a sham, that Warhol was more of a poser, a, a fakir than being a true artist. Well, you got to spend time with these people. Like another day, I will talk about my lunch with Andy. I had an amazing long lunch with Andy Warhol back in 1976, and all I can tell you, without going into a long diatribe, one of the most intelligent people I've talked to, and we talked about a lot of things. We talked about a film that was shot in the hills outside of Vancouver by Altman, the great filmmaker, called McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which had the music of Leonard Cohen, and it was quite the film. But we talked about, Warhol and I, about Robert Altman's use of ambient sound, the sound of water, the sound of voices behind, right? The layering, the the audio layering of things, and we had a great talk. Of course, he was Warhol. We talked about. I didn't know I was going to get into this now, but I'm on a roll here, so we'll do it. We were talking about the stars in the film, McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And the stars were Warren Beatty and Julie Christie, both of whom incredibly beautiful and talented people. And Warhol was talking about them. He just said, "Oh, they're so beautiful. I just want to put them both on the top of a wedding cake surrounded by icing." He would say that, and the next minute we'd talk about, different elements of sound and just anyway. So these people, these rebels, the rebel culture people, they see things differently, and they present that vision they have to us, so that we have to spend some time with the complexity of what they're doing, because they're complex, right? It doesn't, a lot of it has to do with the amount of work and industry they put into their particular vision, right? Again, Andy Warhol. I got an Andy Warhol quote here. Lou Reed, who was the creative songwriter of Velvet Underground, and on its own, there's a photo behind me of Lou that I took. When he was beginning to engage with Warhol, and he saw him as a bit of a mentor, because Warhol was just such a productive guy, and had this place called the Factory where he was doing all this work. So Lou Reed wrote, I forget how many songs, but let's say 5 songs in a day. He just was on fire, and he proudly went up to Warhol and said, Andy, I wrote 5 songs today. And Warhol replied, well, that's good, but you should have done 6. So Warhol was like that. He worked. He continually pushed himself. And anyway, I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but I think it sort of fits into this idea. Warhol understood the visual gestalt, the idea that an image um, had a bunch of different parts, but those parts all came together um, um, to create another whole, right? Like the image of Marilyn Monroe was simply a still from a 1950s film called Niagara, and that it's a publicity shot. He took that image, almost a toss-off image of Marilyn Monroe, and turned it into a historic icon. I mean, Warhol's images of Marilyn Monroe are some of the most memorable images of the 20th century. I hope you enjoyed today's rebel romp, and I hope there was lots that came through it in the way of different aspects of rebel culture. And so stay tuned. There's going to be episode 3, and we'll go somewhere else. So do keep the quest alive. And as I say, hug a rebel, and I'll see you next time I post something. All right. Ciao for now.